In a way, territory is all about border and about blockages, but I think what PerforMigrations does is to highlight the way that those blockages can be removed through different kinds of communication and mobility and cooperation.
It's easy to hit the name and get lost and not be sure it's true. Stay real and grounded, stay open-minded, stand out, don't be shy, celebrate and shout it. You and I, you.
People of the Territory is pointing out it is through all those kinds of performative gestures that are every day and not just spectacular gestures that create a sense of belonging or not belonging.
We say we belong to the land instead of the land belonging to us. We have that as a concept, but I don't see myself as a territory. Or I don't see my people that way. We're part of a territorial existence.
I'm from an indigenous and Irish and Hispanic and crazy background, so which of those have
Ils arrivent en Italie, en général c'est en Italie, ils n'appartiennent pas à l'Italie. Et par contre l'Italie est très hébergeante, elle leur offre quand même plusieurs commodités. Et il y en a maintenant plusieurs qui sont devenus des écrivains italiens, qui écrivent en italien. Est-ce qu'ils appartiennent à l'Italie?
She is speaking from the inside of a culture, and in a way, I came from outside the Sicilian culture.
When they move to another place, they have to have an impact. If they do not have an impact, then they stay among themselves and they disappear.
Il territorio in cui si arriva deve essere in grado di accoglierti non soltanto con un lavoro, non soltanto con una prospettiva di miglioramento economico, ma dovrebbe essere in grado di accoglierti anche con una narrazione che possa includere anche te come protagonista.
There are always newcomers. It says a lot about this world. But these greeners are buying up these absentee landlord dumps and are renovating them, painting them Greek blue, Portuguese green, gay pink, and every other immigrant color. Out of these ghetto streets, they are making a home.
Montreal, in many ways, feels like a spiritual home because of our bilingualism. So it's a very large project, and there's a whole series of events on the subject of mobility, citizenship, identity, with many of our writers this year, including an event called Cloudberry Connections, which is an event that looks at a native community in the far north of Quebec, and it's a storytelling event too. So
returning to these for 3 weeks every August to gather stocks for better.
The initial idea was to work with old vintage suitcases, and that metaphor is really about the idea of baggage and how immigrants and the process of immigration carries the idea of baggage. So each suitcase, as you'll see, contains a different story.
We chose the suitcase as a kind of a technology that symbolizes, but also is actually a material thing that people who are either forced to leave their homes or choose to leave their homes, or for whatever reasons that they do move, or the many reasons we travel, they have to make decisions about what they take with them and what they leave behind. So the suitcase seemed a particularly poignant kind of, not just metaphor, but material object from another epoch, but through many epochs, that is juxtaposed to some of the works you see here.
I mean, immigration in my family is a huge thing. My entire family, both set of grandparents, moved from Italy, small villages in Italy, to Canada, to Montreal. My grandmother traveled, via a boat, La Saturnia, which she called, and docked in Halifax at Pier 21 in, I think it was 1956. So one of the pieces actually has her story. And my dad as well. My dad moved here in 1978, I believe. And the reason why I did the Maribel piece was that's where he first traveled through. That was his entry point into Montreal. Backstory of that is he got arrested and pulled over to immigration because there was an issue with some of the paperwork. So when the word Maribel comes up, we always laugh in the family because we know that's where my dad got shipped back to Saint Jerome, actually, and then eventually a year later he came back when they cleared all the paperwork. And it was literally just a mistake within the files that he submitted.
In 1952, at the age of 15, my father aborted the ship called the Vulcania. He was a solitary figure who was provisioned with not much more than some clothes and what he tells me is his favorite, caciocavallo cheese. And it took a 10-day journey across the ocean to North America. He then took the train from Pier 21 in Halifax port and arrived in Toronto where his father had been waiting for him. Of course, this story is not unusual. It's one of thousands upon thousands at a time when Italians were parting with family and home to find better prospects elsewhere. What is perhaps less common is the time that elapsed before my father made the return journey back to Italy nearly 60 years later. So the return journey was one that was fraught with emotional turmoil, with grief remembered, with the sadness of an abiding affection for what he had left behind. He already knew that his hometown, Monteleone di Puglia, had perhaps 1,000 inhabitants left when it was once a village that was teeming with life.
I was reflecting a little bit on the story that my father told me when he moved here from Italy in the 60s. That he arrived in Montreal and then had to get out to BC to meet his sister who was living there. Because of course that's what many families do when they know someone, or from the same paese or from the same place, that they go and they try and be together. And so he had to get from Montreal all the way out west, and coming from Italy had no idea how long that trip would take him. He was unprepared for the fact that it would take him a week to get all the way to Italy, or all the way to BC. And only because he met another Italian family on the train was he able to figure out that he should stay on and not get off in Toronto or someplace. But the funny thing is that my father told me this story as he was moving me across the country.
We journeyed slowly down the west coast. I was crazy enough to drive. So we stopped at the Amalfi Coast, in Calabria and Sicily. And it turned at all turns my father was received with great affection and enthusiasm. Indeed, I told my father that we should probably come back every year and pretend again that it was his first journey for the benefit of the frequency with which we were treated to limoncello and espresso. But never mind that. He said no. To say that the journey was entirely pleasurable would be misleading. I remember distinctly, for example, that in Rome he wept openly at an exhibit that specialized in or on the subject of migration. He said, "You have no idea how hard it was to leave a place you loved so much." And then he walked away to collect himself. But then there were the moments when the Italians who had been so welcoming with him confided in my father and apprised him about the demographic changes that the country had faced since his departure, and specifically about the sheer number of immigrants who were arriving from Africa and Asia, and who were, in the opinion of some of those with whom he spoke, ruining the country. He too had been confronted with linguistic challenges, with biases related to his nationality, and sometimes even with outright aggression. So he counseled others at various opportunities to show greater compassion to those who were perceived as threats to the national fabric of the country, when they too were seeking Italy in Italy the same kind of change in life that he had been seeking elsewhere, and specifically in Canada.
For me, immigration is very important. It's who I am, it's who my family is. If it wasn't for my grandparents and all the hard work they did here, I wouldn't be where I am in university, in such a privileged position that I am. Address Known was a project that started actually 2 years ago with my colleague Kim Sawchuk. We're both very much interested in how communities work and how they build capacity within their communities. Park Extension in Montreal is, I believe, one of the most multicultural neighborhoods. It's often a landing pad for a lot of immigrants. It's gone through waves. Initially, we saw a lot of Italian and Greek immigrants, whereas now it's more Indian, Pakistan, so it's the waves of immigration change quite often within that neighborhood, depending on who's immigrating to Canada.
Alex walked down Van Horn Avenue, which ran parallel to the train tracks separating Mile End and Outremont from Park X and Petit Patry. It's a city of divides, he thought, Saint Laurent marking the East-West Anglo-Franco schism, east of Saint Laurent, a phrase indicating all that is foreign and unfathomable to an emigre from out west. Elvis-themed laundromats, seniors in tiger print pants and purple bouffants. Van Horn, or the train tracks it mirrors, splits north from south, the complicated system of fences and overpasses forming a bottleneck that slows the flow of trend-seeking 20-somethings into the old man coffee clubs of Little Italy. At one historical point, the split may have worked to keep the immigrants of Montreal north, the Haitian, Pakistani, Ethiopian, Congolese, Ghanaian, Indian, Syrian, Lebanese, Iranian, Jamaican population, from crowding out the older Arabists of Mile End, the Greek, Portuguese, Ashkenazi Jewish, Quebecois pur laine. But now the barrier works the other way, as the young clamor ever north.
C'est touchant, n'est-ce pas? Eh bien, c'est tout faux.
They're involved with social housing, so they make sure that when immigrants come in and they move to Park X, that they have a home that's furnished, etc. So within it, there's embedded themes. So if I click on this, pop that, and then you're getting different options based on what they're talking about. We were interested in the neighborhood because there's been quite a few issues with gentrification, and yet Park X has been very strong with making sure that certain things are protected within its neighborhood. So over the course of 2 years, we've done interviews with people who live there, who are somehow involved at the community level. So we've interviewed, for example, a man named Serge, who's very adamant about keeping and growing various community gardens so that they can actually grow local stuff and share it amongst the community. We've met with Sarita and Joan, who we've interviewed, who appear in the documentary, and they're very much involved with social housing. So making sure that when immigrants do come in, they're able to actually have a house that's furnished, and they're able to sort of start somewhere instead of ending up in the street somehow. So Park X, the project's called Address Known, and it's really about the people that make Park X what it is.
Je suis né à Alexandrie, en Égypte, mais je ne suis pas égyptien. Je suis né dans une famille turque, mais je ne suis pas turc. J'ai étudié dans des écoles britanniques en Égypte, mais je ne suis pas britannique. Ma famille a acquis la nationalité italienne et j'ai appris à parler italien, mais ma langue maternelle est le français. Enfant, pendant des années, j'ai cru à tort que j'étais un garçon français qui, comme tous les gens que je connaissais en Égypte, rentrerait bientôt en France. Rentrer, en guillemets, en France constituait déjà un paradoxe en soi, car presque aucun membre de ma famille proche n'était français ou n'avait même jamais mis un pied en France.
PerforMigrations is meant to open up a way that we can understand what is unique about our locations, but also find new ways through the arts and culture to create collaborative opportunities for people to put the experiences they have into dialogue one with the other.
each suitcase has a tilt sensor in it that will measure upwards, downwards, left and right. And so within the suitcase, we now have a catalog of 4 sounds that as you move the suitcase, you can trigger each of these 4 sounds that will allow you to create a different intersection of one particular moment in time. Travel, next suitcase nostalgia, next suitcase like movement, mobility. You have the ability to kind of see what these suitcases are holding within them, and also then play with the ways that the various pieces of luggage might interact with each other. So as they move forwards, they'll start collecting more and more sounds. They move through PerforMigrations. We have at least the goal of asking for more composers to present more sounds, and they will then have a series of different sounds that they can play that will respond to Montreal, to Vancouver, Bologna, I think is next, like another, like, so as they go through, they'll get more and more luggage, more baggage within the luggage. The goal of this project is to be able to hear the same moment in time across these 6 different locations. There you go. So now we are right in front of the Basilique Notre Dame, and you grab you play, or as you find another hole, you'll find this exact same moment in time as presented from these 6 different locations. So this allows you to move beyond the limitations of a single moment in time. Or like the walking from here to here, so you can hear the way that the architectures, we have the big open square, here there are office buildings, there's like the old Bank of Montreal, like all these places that are changing the way the sound reacts. Even here, like right behind a church, you would think it's very loud, but it's not. So this is a way of exploring the way that oral architecture works, like, or like that architecture informs our oral experience.
The opening sequence, so you would then click and then it would take you to different stories of how we can navigate it. I think it makes sense.
I think it's a better platform.
Yeah, it's much more stable.
I think what PerforMigrations does is helps us to think about what constitutes territory based on the way that people approach territories and are allowed or not allowed to move to them and through them in different ways.
PerforMigration is an European Union project that puts together the academic world, the world of research in the humanities, and different sets of participants. What the final result of PerforMigration in the future could be is a way of reaching a point of understanding among different aspects of our cultural life. It's a way of working together.
Les migrants, ou disons la personne qui vagabonde dans le monde, a un itinéraire qui est là, qui lui est donné par force, mais qui à l'intérieur ne peut pas se comprendre à moins qu'il ne soit construit ou reconstruit. Moi, j'ai reconstitué ma vie en prose, tiens, voilà, mais parce que ça me permet aussi de faire face au futur, parce que quand même il y a un futur, et de me débarrasser du passé si je pouvais. Vous comprenez, on écrit le passé, on se refait en papier afin de pouvoir continuer à vivre sans ce fardeau que serait la nostalgie, le temps, la vieillesse qui s'approche, etc. Toutes ces choses-là, on veut les mettre de côté, on veut s'en débarrasser. Et j'ai essayé de faire ça. Et donc, si c'est vrai, l'immigrant, c'est une personne qui est conteur d'histoires. Il a des histoires, mais il les raconte parce qu'il veut, en même temps qu'il le fait, refaire sa vie en une chronique qui a un sens.
PerforMigration tenta, secondo me, io spero con successo, di mettere tutte queste identità personali, di gruppo, nazionali, e quindi anche le relative lingue, storie e narrazioni, in un rapporto costruttivo. Sostanzialmente, infatti, il prodotto finale, secondo me, sarà anche un racconto. E non a caso si parla spesso nei progetti di PerforMigration di storytelling, perché noi siamo nati per raccontare e impariamo ciò che ci sta intorno, ciò che è stato il nostro passato e quello che sono le nostre speranze per il futuro, grazie allo storytelling.
The new identity is earned, the one you're born in is inherited. At the same time, inheritance could be a burden, right? How do you position yourself in between, right? How do you negotiate? Can literature help you in finding a way to negotiate?
La littérature, elle peut pas produire des textes qui sont complètement fidèles au territoire. C'est-à-dire, la littérature, c'est pas un témoignage. La littérature, c'est pas juste un reflet de la réalité. La littérature a un rapport au territoire de fidélité, mais aussi parfois de trahison, ne serait-ce que dans la langue. On n'est pas dans une langue qui témoigne de ce qui se passe. Nous, les humains, des êtres de territoire, mais la littérature permet de réinventer le territoire. La littérature permet aussi de penser le territoire autrement, de ne pas l'accepter tel qu'il est. C'est un lieu d'expérimentation. Le livre, c'est un espace, déjà, et c'est un espace où la géographie dans laquelle on est peut changer, peut se redistribuer. Donc, je suis tout à fait d'accord à dire qu'il y a des liens entre la littérature et le territoire, mais c'est des liens de création. Voilà.
What I like with literature is that literature offers us the opportunity to look at things in new ways. It's one of the things when I teach literature in my classes, I begin by saying, why do I even bother teaching literature? There's a couple of studies and a wonderful article that came out recently that suggests that literature teaches us, that is the hard reading, not the quick reading on the internet when we read a really quick article, the reading of novels and so forth, actually cultivates a sense of imaginative sympathy with others, empathy for others. And that's, I think, the process by which we enact change. So I like this because I think that's exactly what literature is inviting us to do. The new wave of writers is inviting us to do that, to think very differently about how we conceptualize who we are, our identities, and our relationships to each other.
Anche in italiano è difficile. Ciascuno si porta appresso la propria identità territoriale. Credo che bisogni abbandonare, per comprendere bene che cosa è la loro risposta ai territori in cui arrivano, bisogna abbandonare la parola identità, perché la parola identità ha come radice etimologica la stessa della parola identico. Per cui l'identità si costruisce per similitudine, non per differenza, e invece la differenza è la prima cosa che ti accoglie quando vai in un altro paese. Cercare di ricostruire un'identità attraverso percorsi di cose identiche che si somigliano significa condannarsi alla marginalità e a una cittadinanza parallela fatta di poco confronto. Credo che sia molto più valido da questo punto di vista il termine appartenenza, perché prescinde da quante cose si hanno in comune.
A territory is meaningless if it doesn't have people, and people have a language. And so when you have people from one territory moving to another territory, they bring their language with them. And naturally what happens is that their language and their history and their culture also moves with them and morphs the moment they move elsewhere. In as much as the territory that receives them also begins to change because of the appearance of other people.
Io penso al mio stesso paese, che è fatto di soli 10.000 abitanti, tutti nati a Cabras. Non si può usare il termine identità. Nel mio paese ci sono persone diversissime da me, nessuno mi è identico, io non sono identica a nessuno. E tuttavia tutti mi appartengono e io appartengo a tutti loro. Questa cosa è vera anche in qualunque paese io mi muova. Tutto intorno a me è differenza, eppure tutto intorno a me è appartenenza, se io lo decido. In questo senso la mia terra è la mia terra sempre, ma la mia gente è la mia gente ovunque.
I grew up in a society where we were cordoned off, we cordoned ourselves off by trying to be a colonial culture. And what happens is that we didn't last. We bring our stories elsewhere in languages that our parents did not know. And maybe that's our way of expiating some of the damage that was done in the past.
It's like this incessant weight, so heavy that I felt like I would break. I feel right under my skin. So I kept going in a race against myself. God damn, I wasn't toying. It took time, but I got over and just broke free. Now you couldn't know my story just by looking at me. I feel good under my skin. Love is good in my life. I feel great, so happy I'm alive. No one's gotta lose. I believe we can all win. Get rid of your blues and let someone in. I keep slipping under. To the mirror, but what I see ain't true. I gotta go faster, or I'ma be left behind feeling like I'm not cool. I don't care if you don't like me, cause I love myself. I don't care if you don't like me, cause I love myself. People easily project themselves all over you. It's easy to maybe
partie de moi qui n'est pas avec moi, qui n'est plus avec moi. Et donc j'aime toujours la métaphore, si vous avez lu, comment il s'appelle, Merleau-Ponty, il a aimé toujours la métaphore d'un membre qui a été coupé, et pour moi c'est comme si un bras avait été amputé et qui est resté en Égypte. Et moi je suis le reste du corps qui fait le travail d'avoir deux bras, mais je préfère l'image du contraire, qu'en fait le corps est resté en Égypte, moi je ne suis que le bras. À qui le reste du corps manque. Et c'est vrai, une partie de moi est restée là-bas, une partie de moi est restée à Rome. C'est-à-dire tous les projets que j'avais eus en Égypte, les projets que j'avais eus à Rome sont restés là. Ils continuent leur lustre continue à éblouir, mais il est tout seul, il ne vit plus, ou il est en suspension. Et donc, c'est-à-dire que moi, de New York, je viens et je tâche de me refaire avec cette personne que j'avais été et que je voulais être.
I don't care if you don't like me, cause I love myself. I don't care if you don't like me, cause I love myself. I don't care if you don't like me, cause I love myself. I don't care if you don't like me, cause I love myself.
Italy is at the forefront of a tragic movement of migration. It seems impossible, but every day, nowadays, right now, there are people dying in the water of a very small sea. And the Mediterranean Sea, compared with the Atlantic Ocean, is nothing. It's a lake. It's little larger than the Ontario Lake. But still, people are dying trying to escape from North Africa.
You see that everywhere in France, certainly in Italy right now with the constant arrival of migrants and the call across Europe to support these migrating peoples. It's increasingly it's part of what we mean by globalization, and it's the beauty of it on the one hand, and it's also the tragic elements of migration that's part of globalization.
On voit la migration toujours comme quelque chose de très difficile, c'est-à-dire c'est partir, c'est être sans abri, c'est être dans des abris précaires. On voit, il y a tout un discours sur immigrer, c'est triste, émigrer, c'est triste. Moi, je crois que la migration est quelque chose de joyeux, je crois. Il y a un rapport à... Bon, elle peut être très triste parce qu'il y a des histoires qui sont pathétiques. Il y a des régions du monde où on s'en bat parce qu'il se passe des choses terribles. Mais je crois qu'il faut envisager les mouvements de population, pas seulement comme des choses épouvantables, comme c'est le cas dans beaucoup de cas, mais aussi comme une nécessité de la transhumance chez l'humain. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a on n'a pas à rester toute sa vie dans son coin de pays. Il peut y avoir quelque chose de joyeux à vouloir parcourir le monde et à vouloir aller s'installer ailleurs parce qu'on peut se réinventer. Moi, ce que j'aime bien toujours, c'est pour ça que j'aime la littérature, c'est qu'on peut se réinventer.
Well, I think what it is it's pointing out that space is really constituted by the movements and the interactions and the relations between people. And so by our movements, by our interactions, by the way we work, live, play, love together, that's what creates the affinities that we have with a territory, but also the ways that we also may exclude others from the kind of territories that we're constituting. So what People of the Territory is pointing out, it is through all those kinds of performative gestures that are every day and not just spectacular gestures that create a sense of belonging or not belonging.
I belong to the land, just like a fish belongs to the water and so on and so forth, that I'm an aspect of the territory itself, that we are all together, the animals, the trees, the bugs, all of these beings, the mosquitoes, we have tons of mosquitoes where I come from, they all are part of this territoriality, they're all part of that landscape.
But it's true that the sense of being and belonging is so important, and it must be grounded, it must be materialized somehow.
People who travel bring with them and not only their itinerary, but their way of thinking, their prejudices, their culture, their history. And when they move to another place, they have to have an impact. If they do not have an impact, then they stay among themselves and they disappear, because you cannot exist in an environment and be completely cordoned off. It doesn't last.
Well, I think the project opens up the possibility for collaborations with people. I think all the artists and the artworks are thinking about new ways of producing quickly that responds to current political and contemporary issues. We know right now that Italy is facing issues around migrations across the sea for people looking for refuge. So there's, from North Africa. So there's many things that are happening in the world right now around immigration policy, around the way that people are facing different issues around languages that I think are ones that are not universal experiences, but located in different regions.
In a strange way, you almost hope that 10 years from now, people would look back on some of our efforts and think them to be dated because the conversation has progressed and evolved 10 years from now. But who really knows? But what we're doing with this exhibition is using very modern technology combined with a very sort of almost antique old aesthetic to tell stories from all sorts of times. So I would think that some of the materials might be considered timeless, and some of them hopefully will have contributed in some way to the evolution of conversations about migration and mobility and where people belong.
You just click through, it's got 4 different things now about. Yeah. It's like any kind of computer, but it's a homemade computer, so it's got this.
Is a historical reconstruction of
It's kind of like a diary. You know, it feels like a diary or a journal.
These are just the beginning of a series of pieces that may travel to other places and destinations. We're hoping that, again, the idea is a kind of a curatorial concept that we invite people to steal the idea and work with it, appropriate it. Other works can be put in, so the suitcases are meant to travel to all the other locations with work put inside of it. That's it. So it really is, in some senses, thinking about how do you create a kind of unity of all the disparate elements that may not be completely unified, but coheres in enough of a way to kind of give you a sense of the multiple dimensions of what it means to have to engage with issues of movement and migration in this contemporary moment.